I've made a lot of videos on this channel about my love for pop culture, movies, toys, all that stuff. And toys are one of my personal favorite things. I love when pop culture and movies, cartoon shows become action figures. It's a big part of why I went into making toys professionally for the last 25 years. And while I haven't worked on every property that I love, I've collected them. And if it's something that I fall in love with on the big screen or the small screen, well, I tend to gravitate to the action figure version of them. Hey, what can I say? I'm also a big fan of comic books, and I have when well, I guess you could say I have issues. But now a few years ago, I wanted to expand my horizons a little bit, and I decided to make it a quest to read the 100 greatest books of all time. Now, there's not one definitive list of this, but I kind of got a whole bunch of them together and started pouring through it. And that quickly became 100, 200, 300, 400 books. I'm not saying I read them in a day or even a week, but over the past few years, I have read and collected a lot of great literature. And one of the cool benefits, or sort of fringe benefits of that, is I've gotten some really beautiful looking bookshelves around my house. And being able to fill them up with beautiful looking novels and knowing that I've read through them is really, it gives a big sense of accomplishment. And you feel really great about yourself hanging out in a room full of, big texts, kind of all the books you sort of wish you paid attention to in high school. Well, as a comic book and movie and action figure, call it pop culture fan, I have noticed a lot of things in this literature that's nothing new. I mean, the pop culture version of it is Simpsons did it. Well, it's not necessarily that Simpsons did it, but classic literature has done it. In fact, the more and more I read, and the more I realized so many of these stories were actually interlinked, and there was kind of actually even a shared universe with them referencing each other, I came to realize that the tropes that we see in superheroes and in movies, comics, TV shows, they're not original to modern pop culture at all. In fact, popular culture, if you're looking at it in terms of the tropes that we see in content, is absolutely established in classic literature. I mean, obvious things like the fact that the Hulk is just a reinvention of Mr. Hyde from, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The idea of a scientist turning into a large beastly creature, or the idea of Green Arrow, who is just a modern humanized version of Robin Hood. Things that we've seen before, reinvented. But it goes a lot deeper than that. It's not just that comic books sometimes reinvent classic literature characters, but classic literature characters are doing things that we give credit to comic book characters for. And I'm not just talking about things like Greek gods or Egyptian gods. You know, that's been done before, and I think even best summed up in Christopher Nolan's book, Our Gods Wear Spandex, which, if you haven't checked out this book, I highly recommend it. In fact, Chris was kind enough to give me a copy at New York Comic Con years ago, and I really treasure it. Well, looking at what you might think of as the original comic book, cruciform script, as well as the accompanying statues and different artwork of ancient Mesopotamia, one of the first true superheroes is probably Gilgamesh, a character who was mightier than the mortal man and did great things. Or you might even look at the Iliad by Homer and characters like Achilles, who was half god, half man, and could do great feats and had great strength and great abilities. He also had great weaknesses, which is something that's a superhero trope. The whole concept of the Achilles heel. Yes, his heel was his weakness, and he would die.
Come on, boy. Achilles, heel.
Then there's also things like Beowulf, who was just a normal guy without superpowers, but he did heroic things. And was, as we all know, superheroes are required to have powers, right? Otherwise, maybe they're not. But there's other things that have been attributed to modern culture that started a lot earlier. Something like the Mary Sue, the concept of putting yourself into a storyline or a character that can basically do anything and is just a perfect character. Well, the first of these really is Dante, and not the guy from Clerks. I'm talking about the guy from the Divine Comedy, where he travels throughout hell and meets all sorts of amazing characters like, well, not like Malbolgia from Spawn, although his name, Malbolgia, comes from the Malbolge, which are the holes in hell, the pits of hell are called Malbolge. So while Dante is traveling through hell and meeting all these fantastical creatures, his guide is Virgil, who is the author of the Aeneid, which is kind of like a sequel to the Odyssey and the Iliad. And, well, that's a whole other YouTube video. But the reason that Virgil is his guide is because Dante is kind of like the first fanboy. Virgil was his hero, and writing a story where he's hanging out with his hero, I mean, it's kind of like me writing a comic book where I hang out with Stan Lee and we do stuff together. So he's being led on his magical adventure by his personal hero. So yeah, that's kind of very much like a fan fiction. And it's really the first version of fan fiction in a lot of ways. Now, another thing that's just sort of one step off of this is cosplay. Obviously, a big part of pop culture, and we all love to dress up as our favorite superheroes and spacemen and women. Well, how was this sort of created? The original cosplayer really was Don Quixote, the character from Cervantes. Now, you probably know him best as the guy who charged windmills thinking they are giants, right? The famous scene from the first book. Well, his secret origin is that he was basically obsessed with the stories of knights from medieval times, and he read so many of them that he convinced himself that he was a knight. He basically became totally deluded. And even in the second book, he's aware of the first book. So the second book is self-aware. And as he's going around thinking that he's a knight, he's aware of his first book. It's kind of like, again, like if I dressed up as Batman and decided I could fight crime just because I read Batman comic books, it's really the same concept.
What gives you the right? What's the difference between you and me?
I'm not wearing hockey pads.
All right, so what about the team-up? Another trope of comic books. We love to see our superheroes hanging out with other superheroes, right? I mean, they've been doing this since day one, and it's a great way to sell more books. And it's a great way to bring in new readers, because when you see your favorite hero battling another. I mean, the moment Iron Man and Captain America showed up on screen together in Avengers 1 is still, to me, one of the greatest moments ever. Well, where did team-up come from in literature? I kind of look at A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens as being the original superhero team-up. And you might be like, what? There's no superheroes in Christmas Carol, and I beg to differ. There are many powerful characters with superpowers, the ability to fly, the ability to time travel, and they team up in order to teach Scrooge to be good again, or, rather to no longer be the old miser he is. And they use their powers to do this, and in the end of the book, Scrooge, based on their adventure together with this team of super beings. All right, well, if there was one character that did it all and multitasked and basically has every possible superhero trope, but pre-superhero, or at least pre-modern comic book, well, everything is in it. Everything from having a secret identity to protect family and friends, or, to not let the arch enemies know who you are in real life, and even things like having a secret lair in his complex where he can do all of his crime fighting from and planning, as well as being a rich playboy who uses his money to fund fighting crime. Even has an icon, just like superheroes. In fact, uses this icon to leave behind notes to freak out his enemies and spook them that he might be coming. And of course, if you hadn't figured it out, I'm talking about Sir Percy, the Scarlet Pimpernel. I almost said Pumpernickel. Pimpernel. So, yes, the Scarlet Pimpernel. He uses disguise as a sort of man about town, like a fop, I believe is the term. Oh, well, I'm just, here. But he's truly in disguise, and that's just a facade. He's really a badass crime fighter. In fact, he has an entire league called the League of the Scarlet Pimpernel that helps him fight crime, and he's a ladies' man, he's a swashbuckler, he's been the star of movies, and it's not just one book. In fact, it's an entire series of books. I believe there's 19 of them in total. There's even a poem that he uses, much like Green Lantern, to scare and empower, well, scare his enemies and empower his league. So, yeah, there's really nothing new under the sun. But one of the cool things about this quest of mine when I decided to read all this literature over the past few years is it gave me a new appreciation for current literature, for comic book movies, action figures. And as I said, it also made a really awesome display. And I know all of us out there who are toy fans love having cool displays. So, hey, I definitely recommend it. And it'll give you a new perspective too. What other things have you found in classic literature that were pre-invented before the superhero? Love to hear them in the comments below. Share this video with others who might appreciate it, and hey,